So thanks for your interest again. So I want to introduce Dr. Backhouse, Dr. Samantha Backhouse. She is a neuropsychologist at the Rehabilitation Hospital of Indiana, has been there now 11 years? 12. Yeah, she was 13 when she started. So Dr. Backhouse did her Ph.D. at Nova Southwestern in Florida, did her fellowship at the University of Michigan at the Traumatic Brain Injury Model Systems, which is an important issue, important thing, and then came to RHI and has now heads up all of our outpatient brain injury rehabilitation services. And in doing so has also developed the Brain Injury Coping Skills Group, which you heard referenced earlier. So Dr. Backhouse and Dr. Summer Ibarra developed the Brain Injury Coping Skills Group, which is a really unique group intervention, which has, and it's been published now in several different studies, has been shown to improve what's called self-efficacy after brain injury. That is, the patients learn how to better cope with and manage the effects of their brain injury. And also, the research shows that it improves mood long-term, so avoids depression, avoids anxiety disorders. So it's a really cruel intervention that now even people in prison are getting a version of. So Dr. Backhouse and Dr. Ibarra developed that. So I want to thank her and Dr. Ibarra for their work in that respect. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Backhouse. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. Like Dr. Trexler said, my name is Sam, and I feel very privileged to be here today. And of course, I'm coming to you right after lunch, so hopefully all the fan hasn't sunk in yet, and you guys are all up, had your teas. I'll feel really bad for the person that has to go at like around 3 or 3:15. So I'm fortunate to actually go before 1 o'clock here. So I was asked to come and talk a little bit about a case study, give you a little bit of information about a client that was treated through the resource facilitation system. And the reason why they chose this client is because she is someone that, of course, had a traumatic brain injury and happened to engage in some criminal activity, got into trouble with the law, and ran into quite a few issues. And so the purpose of this talk is really to describe to you a little bit about what some of the trauma that she experienced and how resource facilitation could come in and help, and how some of her challenges that she had actually mimicked or even caused different types of psychiatric disturbances to occur, because that can often be overlooked, and people won't recognize that the person actually had a traumatic brain injury. They'll think that the individual actually just has a history of mental health issues. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about this client. So the objectives might be just slightly different than what's stated in your brochure there. I added a couple. One is to actually first describe who the client is and what happened to her. Then I want to tell you a little bit about the TBI aspect and criminality. And I know that Dr. Trexler spoke about that earlier today, so I won't have to speak in too much depth, but really just hit some key parts as it pertains to this client and tell you a little bit about how some of those psychiatric issues she experienced can often be confused with the effects of that brain injury, particularly to those affecting the frontal lobes. And finally, I'm going to have Tony come up, who is her resource facilitator, and tell you a lot more about what was the role of RF and how did RF get involved in some of the complications, I think, and some of the barriers and things that they've really had to struggle through, but also some of the successes. So I'm excited that Tony helped me out today. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jennifer. I call her Jennifer now, and she is a 49-year-old female. Jen unfortunately suffered a number of traumatic brain injuries, which I'm going to get into detail here in just a second. But just to give you quick background information, she did complete a high school education plus 2 more years as a dental assistant. And for most of her life so far, she's worked in property management. She's held a number of different positions as a property manager. And she divorced in, I think, 2000. She was married for about 13 years. She actually had 2 children who are now in their 20s, I believe. And she's actually estranged from them right now, unfortunately, unless something has changed recently. Yeah, okay, wonderful. See, good update. But she was estranged from them for a while due to some interpersonal and relationship issues, which are very, very common, of course, as you know, after a traumatic brain injury. I also just wanted to mention briefly on other medical history. Yes, she does have 2 aortic pseudoaneurysms, likely not a huge contributing factor in this case that I'm aware of. However, again, unfortunately, she had reported a history of abuse as a child, and this started when she was a toddler and went on until about the 9th grade. So and this included physical abuse. So we all know that when individuals when they have to face physical abuse, unfortunately, there might be some instances of head trauma that often go undetected. So we don't know if that occurred and if that affected her in any way up until her first documented traumatic brain injury. Okay, so Jen unfortunately suffered 3 injuries. The first one started when she was in the 8th grade. She doesn't remember a lot about it, but can tell you that it occurred when she was at the bus stop and she was assaulted by 5 other females. I don't know the circumstances, what led to that assault, but that ended in her experiencing trauma to the brain. She had, you heard Dr. Trexler this morning tell you a little bit about some of the effects of brain injury and how it can cause challenges to cognitive functions, emotional, neurobehavioral functions. So of course for her, she started having some significant deficits in cognitive functions and starts developing problems in school. She has difficulty maintaining her attention. She has difficulty keeping up with her grades and focusing. And unfortunately, it wasn't actually until way later in 2005 that she got diagnosed actually with attention deficit disorder. But after this first injury, when she was in the 8th grade, she also started developing some behavioral issues. She became less motivated in school, and she recalls that she just didn't have the drive to actually want to do well or to try to compensate for challenges. And interpersonally, she had difficulty keeping friendships. She had difficulty making friends, and the friends that she had difficulty keeping them. These are all very, very common after traumatic brain injury. And for children, and even for adults, but particularly so for children, they're not often going to be the ones to come and talk about some of the challenges that they're experiencing. As a matter of fact, they are going to get overlooked as disruptive or behavioral problems with truancy, skipping school. They're going to start to be labeled as having emotional or psychiatric issues or even ADD, but sometimes if they're quiet, if they're just getting by, they're just going through school, and not causing too many difficulties, it's not often going to be caught. So it's very, very common, like in her case, to go undetected and to go untreated. I just wanted to add a note here in terms of other significant history. I kind of threw it right here in this slide because I feel like in the chronology of her life, it should be noted that in about 2003 and 2004, she did start to have a little bit of some difficulty with drug and alcohol use. She was charged with operating while intoxicated, and then she actually ended up going in for drug treatment later on. Okay. So injury number 2 occurs in 2011. She was involved in a car accident. And in this case, she actually went on to experience continued cognitive issues. So her cognitive issues amplified. They get even worse. Her behavioral issues, motivational issues, they amplified. And as a matter of fact, at this point, she starts becoming impulsive. And you may have heard a little bit about impulsivity issues after frontal lobe injuries and some of those neurobehavioral challenges that people have. So she starts becoming impulsive, and you pair that with bad decision making, and now you're making bad decisions impulsively. This is where she starts getting into a little bit more difficulty, and while she's at work, she forged a signature. So she had forged someone else's signature where she worked for 8 years, ends up losing that position. And actually, you're going to see a little bit an interview with her. She won't know why. She can't justify, she can't explain. There's no rationale or reason for it, hence the impulsivity. And I think after this injury, she had gotten hurt physically, so she actually starts developing chronic pain issues. And those chronic pain issues can kind of have synergistic effects when someone has a traumatic brain injury. So it can actually sort of potentiate or even increase some of the challenges that people have with emotional functions and with cognitive deficits. The most significant injury she has, however, occurred 3 years later in 2014. She's on the back of a motorcycle, and she does lose consciousness during this accident, and she's placed in ICU. She's treated at the hospital, and then after that treatment, she goes home. Even though she suffers a number of increased challenges, and she had actually had a documented injury at that time, there is no rehabilitation. She does not go on for any outpatient rehabilitation for the increase in cognitive difficulties or psychological issues. But her memory problems amplify. She has difficulty remembering day-to-day events, and at this point, she actually develops new onset of anosmia, which is inability to smell. And having the inability to smell, sometimes we actually will test that during neuropsychological testing when we're suspicious that the person may have had a mild traumatic brain injury, because it can often be a very sensitive indicator that someone has had injury to that orbital frontal area. But she recognizes that she's now no longer able to smell, and of course has decreased taste sensitivity. She goes on to experience even worsening again, amplified emotional issues. She becomes very, very depressed, and at this point, actually, the depression becomes substantial. So she becomes deeply depressed, and she's very anxious. She develops problems with anger, and those neurobehavioral issues become so significant that now she's starting to lose jobs. Now she's starting to have a number of employment issues, and unfortunately, a year after her injury, she now starts engaging in a significant number of criminal activities. So over the next year, she has 6 different acts of theft that she's involved in, and they were shoplifting charges, times that she goes into stores that she has never gone into before. She's stealing things that she has no reason to steal, salt shakers. She has no reason to steal salt and pepper shakers, right? But she goes to stores, starts stealing things that she has no reason to steal. She's not in need of those items. Looking back, she's able to say that. And as a matter of fact, she doesn't even remember going into these stores. So for several of these events, she has no memory of engaging in these shoplifting acts. And when I was reviewing the interview with her, she actually had watched the videotapes of herself while she was engaging in these shoplifting acts, and it was as if she was watching a different person. She couldn't recognize herself, not by physical appearance, but by the facial, the demeanor, the way that she looked, the way that she presented, she had a very blank stare on her face as if she was in some sort of robotic mode. She had absolutely no expression of emotion on her face. She just appeared to have a different personality, be in the same body, but a different person. And those shoplifting charges are still pending, and as a matter of fact, she even ends up getting into more difficulty employment-wise, losing her job because she ends up stealing money from her place of employment. She starts seeing a counselor at this point, and because now she is extremely depressed, having a lot of suicidal thoughts. She's very angry. She feels a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. She doesn't understand why this is happening to her. She doesn't understand why she's acting very impulsively, having all these risk-taking behaviors, illegal activities, and she doesn't know what's driving this activity. And so, and not only does she not understand herself, other people can't understand. So, and she's unable to explain why. So she goes in, sees a counselor, starts getting just a few sessions of therapy, but unfortunately, due to loss of insurance, she's unable to continue this. And later is diagnosed with bipolar disorder due to some of the symptom presentation. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how that's connected to some of the frontal lobe issues that she's having. So she participates in a neuropsychological evaluation, or actually a neurovocational evaluation, through the resource facilitation system. And what they find is actually there is evidence of brain impairment. There's evidence of a neurologic connection there. And it isn't just widespread. As a matter of fact, it's actually showing a specific pattern of left hemisphere involvement and involvement more in these sort of frontal and anterior issues. So, like for many patients with traumatic brain injury, you do not expect for there to be a dramatic change or a dramatic loss of intelligence. We probably would have expected her to be somewhere in the average range prior to this, and we have ways of estimating that based on a number of factors, but on the test that she took, she ended up being in the low average range. So slight differences, not substantial. She showed good effort across the test, but she ended up showing this left frontal temporal involvement by showing impairments in verbal fluency. She is very slow in her production and in her ability to quickly generate verbal information, to categorical information, to different categories, to different letter cues and letter prompts, and particularly on the task where they ask you to it's one of those tasks where they give you a particular letter and they say, I want you to come up with as many words as you can. Let's start with this particular letter. And what's interesting about that task is it's not just a verbal test, but it also highly involves those frontal lobes because you have a set of rules that you need to follow. And you have to remember what those rules are. And there's only 2 of those rules. But you have to inhibit yourself. You have to stop yourself from doing what comes natural. And you have to do that to produce those words under this set of rules as fast as you can under a certain time frame. So individuals with that left frontal impairment are likely to do really poorly on this particular task. She shows some impairment in understanding and processing complex verbal information. So if you tell her to do a command and you say, I want you to do this with that, she does okay. But if you tell her something like a paragraph level information, some of it's implied, so you have to make guesses on what's going on in a situation. You have to make guesses on how that person, the subject in that story is feeling, and what the consequences might be and what actually happened. She has difficulty with that. So she's losing track of information. She's losing the ability to process that information, and that can be for a number of different reasons, not just comprehension, but working memory, manipulating that information while it's coming in, being able to get at what's implied versus explicit information, and being able to remember that information. And we know that because on rote verbal memory tests, she's impaired. She's not remembering information. And remember, she's showing good effort. So there's no indication that she showed poor effort or variable effort on these particular tests, and actually the fact that it showed a very systematic pattern leads us to believe that there is some focal areas of deficits that are going on that are likely impacting her ability in making good decisions, in being able to think flexible, in being able to see the big picture and connect the dots and plan and organize that will all connect back to those frontal lobe systems. The results of the psychological testing, of course, showed substantial issues with depression, significant sadness, agitation, restlessness, irritability, anxiety, remorse, shame, embarrassment. All of this is affecting her self-confidence, her sense of self-worth. She's feeling like she can't do anything right. She's feeling like, what's the point? No matter how hard I try, I can't make it right, and I keep getting myself in trouble. And you feel helpless, right? She's feeling helpless about this, that there isn't anything that's in her control, that she has the ability to change. And she doesn't understand that. And so when this happens and you don't know that the brain injury has been a significant contributor, you tend to do a lot of self-blame here. You're making mistakes, you think there's something specifically wrong with you, not wrong with the rest of the world. What's happening? This is causing a lot of confusion. Not only that, but in her personality testing, she's showing a pattern where now she's not only doubting herself, but she's doubting everyone else. She's becoming very paranoid. She doesn't know who to trust. She doesn't know who to go to. She doesn't know who's against her and who's with her. And when you start becoming very paranoid and you don't know who to trust, while you have a dependent personality, individuals with dependency feel that they need others to make things right for them. They need others, and they look to others to feel secure, to feel a sense of accomplishment, to feel safe. And so what she's doing is she's doing this thing here, where she wants you here, she needs you, and she's pushing you away. And so this characterological style that's developed is actually perpetuating all of these challenges that she's already having from the traumatic brain injury, causing a number of problems interpersonally across her life. And then she develops bipolar disorder. She develops bipolar-like symptoms that mimic that of someone with bipolar. And of course, she's diagnosed with bipolar disorder because they don't know she's had a brain injury. And in this case, it was brain injury induced. So what I wanted to do here is show you a video clip of an interview with this individual. And typically, I wouldn't get into 10 to 15 minutes of showing an entire clip, but in this case, every bit of it seemed very informative because you're going to see. So I want you to pay attention to her affect, her facial expressions, things that she's reporting, things that she feels bad about, and how this all becomes connected. Let's see if I can. I don't think I can play it from here. I think I actually need to come up here and do it. Claire, what time are we at, actually? 1:10, and I'll have about, yeah, okay. So I'll play a little bit of this, and then, whoopsie. Oh, here we go. See if you guys can hear this, okay?
So thank you, Jennifer, for coming in to meet with us today.
Can you hear that, guys? Okay.
It's my understanding you've had a couple of traumatic brain injuries. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Can you describe the first one, Jennifer? What happened to you?
Mm-hmm. The first one was I was in 8th grade, and 5 girls at the school bus stop assaulted me. They were taking their hands to my hair and putting their knees into my head and face, and then slamming my head against the sidewalk.
Okay. And how were you after that, Jennifer? How did that affect you? Do you remember?
I don't remember a lot of it. I remember just really, I remember seeing a neighbor come out, and I know she called like the ambulance, and I went to the hospital. But I don't remember like the ambulance ride. I don't remember anything much other than both my parents showed up at the hospital.
Yeah. Did you have problems in school after that, Jennifer, or did you have problems at home, or did you have, what was life like after that for you?
Kind of both. I had problems focusing and remembering things for tests, and it was hard. I always I've had problems with developing friendships, lasting friendships. I thought I was outgoing, and we moved a lot, so I had to be outgoing in order to make friends, but keeping them was another story.
Yeah, okay.
And as far as studies, I did probably C.D. work.
Yeah. Do you feel like that was your capability, or were you having trouble being motivated?
I had definitely been motivated and focused.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So then you had a second accident.
Yes, it was in 2011. I was in a car accident to where somebody ran a red light and T-boned my car, and my head hit the window pretty hard, and I was wearing high heels, and the impact was so hard that my heels broke in two.
Oh, okay. And did that affect your ability to focus or your memory also?
Yes, I was working for a company for going on 8 years.
Yeah.
And I had actually forged a signature and was fired from that job.
Okay, after the second injury. Okay, and how did that happen, Jennifer? What led you to do that, do you think?
I had no idea, because it wasn't something I needed to forge anyway. And I just did it. I didn't think, oh, this is wrong, and I didn't think this is right. I just did it.
Yeah, right. Huh. And had you ever done anything like that before, Jennifer?
No.
Yeah. And after you did it, what happened? Did you realize, or did you think, oh gosh, I shouldn't have done that, or did time pass and...
It hit me when they fired me.
Yeah.
That I was so mad at myself. Why'd you make that decision?
Yeah, right. So had you, and so you forged this check or document or whatever. Were you doing other things kind of without thinking about it at that time?
Yes. I'm a property manager, and I was at an office to where it was a one-person office, so I did everything, and I had about 10,000 things going on at once. Yeah. And just did it.
Yeah, okay. So then you had a third injury, Jennifer. Can you tell us about that?
It's the worst one. It was very traumatic for me. It was in 2014 of June, and I was the passenger on a motorcycle. And it was about 9 o'clock at night, and I was actually home in my pajamas, and the guy who I was dating at the time, out of the blue, called me and said, hey, do you want to go for a motorcycle ride? Well, everything in me told me no, don't. But I did. Got my clothes on. He met me, about 9 o'clock, and I had no idea he had been drinking. And so we went to a restaurant, had one drink, which I thought would have been his one drink. Right. Got on the motorcycle. We were at a very busy intersection at 82nd and Allisonville. And all I remember is I hit his back and I said, what are you doing? And he was going towards the median, which is a huge median. Yeah. And that's the only thing I remember.
Okay.
From what I understand, the bike, both flipped and I flipped, and everybody fell on me, the bike and him, and my head hit the big median. And that's all I remember.
Okay.
I remember a little part in the ambulance when they were taking my bracelets off. I remember them handing me the phone in the emergency room, asking who to call.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't remember anything, and I know that they put me in ICU. I was there in ICU for 3 days, and I don't remember any of that.
Yeah.
And I had a concussion, of course. Every single rib on this side was broken. I had 2 broken on my right side. I had 2 aneurysms, and my lung was punctured. And so I was there at the hospital for a total of 7 days, and I had to take a month off of work, of which I fell into a deep, deep depression where I'd just bawl every day.
Yeah.
Not only
Do you know why?
The pain was bearable with some pain meds. It was okay. The ribs were the hardest part. Very lightheaded, dizzy.
Yeah, of course.
But as far as the deep depression, I have no idea. I couldn't stop bawling.
Yeah. So, and do you think that affected your behavior or your thinking or your cognitive abilities, Jennifer?
Definitely. It was a year to the date, the next year, so June of 2015, where I shoplifted for the first time in my life.
And how did that happen?
I wasn't even going shopping. I was going, running errands, dry cleaners, went to the grocery store, and I have no idea why I turned my car into a department store.
Yeah.
Walked in, gathered a bunch of clothes, went into the dressing room, put them in my purse. I had money in my purse to pay for everything. And I didn't know I was caught until January. I get it at 12:30 in the morning on a Sunday evening. I get a knock at my door. It's the police. There's a warrant out for my arrest.
Yeah.
And I had to go to jail for the first time.
Yeah. And when was that? What year was that?
That was 2015, January.
Okay, so after your third brain injury.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I did it 6 more times and got caught 6 more times.
Okay.
Arrested. So each time I did it, I wasn't thinking, I could get caught. I wasn't thinking at all. I don't know. I didn't need anything. I had money in my purse each time.
Yeah.
And I had to go to jail.
Yeah.
A lot. And the judge doesn't understand what's going on. My lawyer doesn't even understand. My family doesn't understand.
Yeah.
It's been very painful. And in January, I also, I was working for a property management company, and we accepted cash. I pocketed some cash, and they found out, and I got fired.
Yeah.
I look back, and it's just, I'm so shameful of it.
Yeah.
So this video goes on for about 5 more minutes. And I did let it play on this long, though, because I think sometimes this is really the heart of it, and it's very interesting. So I'm actually going to move on, though, because I want to tell you a little bit about how her challenges are related to some of the injury that she had, and why is it that it looks similar? Why are individuals that have a traumatic brain injury are often at risk for having these types of behaviors? Before I get into that, though, I will just kind of mention, when I first saw the video, I was really taken aback by her lack of emotion, right? And she can tell you about all these horrible things that happen, but has a very flat affect. And it's as if she's sort of telling you a story of someone else. And when I think about feeling shame and guilt, makes me personally feel sad. I would, maybe she's cried one too many times, but that can happen when you have had frontal lobe injuries, that you can experience these emotions, but not be congruent in the way that you show that emotional expression. There, she also made comments as to no one understands. She doesn't know why. No one else gets what's happening with her. And again, leading to a lot of confusion about the whole situation. And she doesn't know why she's doing these acts. There's no rhyme or reason for it. Dr. Trexler talked this morning about TBI and criminality and how the two are connected. And so very, very briefly summarizing, when a traumatic brain injury occurs, most of the time, particularly, let's say in a situation like this, you're going to have majority of the injury to the frontal lobe of your brain and those temporal lobes, because you're going to go forward, and then there may be sort of that contra injury that he talked about. So that frontal lobe and the temporal lobe get hit first, and majority of the time. Also, there are areas that get hit more in the, what we call the distinction of the gray-white matter junction, so deep in the brain where the cortex meets the sub or the deeper area of the brain, and those axons rip and they shear, causing a number of, causing the diffuse axonal injury, which can also be widespread throughout the brain, and it can also occur more in the posterior and brainstem areas. So when that starts to swell, that can sometimes account for people going into a coma or being very, very confused, lethargic for long periods of time. We know that frontal lobes is a very common place where traumatic brain injuries can occur. I wanted to tell you, describe the frontal lobes just a little bit. Tomorrow, I think, Dr. Trexler, tomorrow, I think he's going to speak in great, great detail about, or much greater detail about, how the frontal lobes look, what are the different aspects, areas of the frontal lobe, and how each of those different areas are responsible for different types of functions. This is all listed here for you. I don't want to read off the slide, but what I do want to get across is that it's funny, whenever we teach coping skills groups to people and we're teaching patients about the different parts of their brain and how the injury affected their brain, I often get the most excited talking about the frontal lobes. And that's because the frontal lobes are so advanced, right? It's an advanced part of our human species, our neocortex, our newest cortex, and that those frontal lobes are what makes us who we are. What makes us distinctly different from each other. It's what gives us our sense of morality, our sense of ethics, conscientiousness, our right and wrong. It's what allows us to think through tasks. It's not always the intelligence, but how you use it and how you apply that information. And so these frontal lobes are responsible for our highest level of cognitive functions, or many of you probably have heard the term executive functions, right? And so I like to kind of think of the executive of a company, the captain of a ship. I'm a little bit of a nerd, so I used to use the the example of Captain Kirk, but apparently I was showing my age, so I now have to use a different example. So I don't know if you can help me think of a good one. All I can think of right now is the captain of a ship, right? So the captain of a boat, the captain of a ship, airplane, the executive of the company, and even the conductor of an orchestra. You have to know what's going on at all times. You have to be able to walk into a room and be able to assess the situation in a split second. You have to be able to make split-second decisions. And you have to plan properly. You have to organize information. And when people are talking to you, and all these bits of information are coming in, you got to figure out what filing cabinet you're going to put all that information in your brain. Right? So you have to organize that properly, how you organize your life. You have to use good judgment, decision-making. Should I go here or should I go here? Right? And if there's a candy bar, no big deal. But when you're talking about engaging in an act that could potentially cause lifelong damage to you, and your frontal lobe has been impacted, there is no thinking through something. You don't have that ability. You don't even have the ability to disinhibit yourself from saying the thing that comes to your mind. So frontal lobe is responsible for that thinking ability, the high thinking skills in being able to do the jobs that you guys do and integrate all that information and make life-altering decisions. Frontal lobes are also responsible for those behaviors, for the emotions. So those behaviors we call neurobehavioral functions. I talked about the impulsivity. And on the flip side of that, instead of being impulsive, so I talk about, instead of being able to put the brake on when you know you're going to say something you shouldn't say, it's being able to press the gas pedal. Right? It's being able to go, to get up and go, to say, to go over and get a sweater when you say you feel cold, or to go use the restroom when you say you need to go, or actually even go find a job, to get up and go to work. So it's responsible for our behaviors. It's responsible for how we feel. So damage to the frontal lobe can cause all kinds of emotional issues: aggression, irritability, restlessness, hyperactivity, hyperkinetic behaviors. It can cause an indifference in attitude. It can make a person act as if they don't care when they say they do. And it can also cause damage in our level of awareness of what our strengths and challenges are. But that's different than monitoring. I can be aware that I have an issue with using my hands way too much. Right? I can tell you that in a conversation, but self-monitoring is being able to look at myself right now and say, stop using your hands, and modifying that behavior. That's all frontal lobe, and being able to do that right then and there in that moment. So all of these things can be impacted from an injury. And this slide comes directly from Dr. Trexler's slides of how, again, those frontal lobe injuries being directly linked to aggression and depression, history of drug and alcohol use. Particularly in areas of the orbital frontal part of the frontal lobe, the orbital frontal cortex, that's the area that really results in these very, very disruptive behaviors. Those are the incredible mood swings and irritability and inappropriate laughter, inappropriate joking, hyperactivity. Can't figure out, even if you know what the goal is, you can't persist in that goal-directed behavior. And like her, you make mistakes over and over and over again, and you can say you shouldn't have done it, but you can't stop, right? You can't learn from your mistakes. So these types of challenges in particular, in all the research, have actually been shown to be the most disabling part of a traumatic brain injury, more than cognitive issues, more than physical issues. And these are the challenges, the neurobehavioral and psychiatric challenges that lead to problems in relationships, employment, social skills, life living. And then they actually get mistaken for pure mental health issues having nothing to do with the injury. I'm actually over my time, but I am going to go over by about 3 or 4 minutes. Tony sounds okay. So I just wanted to show this little clip from, I found this clip online, and it is an advertisement for how to detect bipolar disorder. Remember, this individual, Jen, was diagnosed with bipolar disorder before they even knew she had a brain injury. But just look here, I'll show you about 60 seconds. Hopefully it's not too loud.
How to recognize the symptoms of bipolar disorder. Also known as manic depression, bipolar disorder is a mental illness that can be controlled with medication. Learn to spot this condition's hallmark behaviors. You will need close observation and intervention. Step 1. Look for mood swings, either abnormally elated or excessively angry or sad and hopeless. Onset may be gradual or dramatic, and behavior can be unpredictable. The key is that these mood shifts interfere with a person's life and ability to function. Bipolar disorder can show up as early as childhood, although it more commonly develops in late adolescence or adulthood. Step 2. Recognize the manic stage. Symptoms include a change in mood that may include euphoria, increased energy, a decreased need for sleep, restlessness, impulsiveness, and risky behavior like spending sprees and drug and alcohol abuse. Step 3. Recognize a depressive phase, which can manifest as sadness, hopelessness, insomnia or an excessive need for sleep, changes in appetite, and thoughts of death or suicide. Step 4. Know the 3 main types of the disorder.
Okay, well, we're not here to learn about bipolar disorder per se, so I don't really feel like we need to go through the 3 main types of bipolar disorder, but I did put this slide up here for you because I thought this was interesting, the similarities between someone with a true bipolar disorder that's never had a traumatic brain injury. These are all the different symptoms that someone with bipolar disorder can have, and the ones that are in red font are actually challenges that are very often seen in frontal lobe syndrome, individuals with frontal lobe injuries. So that's why it's often mixed up with different different psychiatric conditions. So what I wanted to do is actually pass it over to Tony because I feel like it's just as important to understand then how did resource facilitation help this individual? What was their role and what sort of difference did they make? So, yeah, absolutely.
So you were talking about bipolar disorder, and you were also talking about orbital. One of the things that we talked about was
Could you maybe tell us a little bit about where that olfactory bulb was located in relation to?
Yeah, and actually I thought there was a slide on that, but so down here where this little arrow is pointing is this orbital frontal area, and that is where this olfactory bulb is. And remember I was saying that oftentimes we will actually test olfaction. We'll test the ability to smell because that can be such a sensitive indicator as you're going to go forward, right? You're going to hit that area. And if there's been any alteration or change in sense of smell, it's usually an indicator that that area of the brain was affected. And actually, interestingly, the research also shows that there is a huge correlation between severity of anosmia or lack of ability to smell and behavioral disorders, problems in interpersonal relationships, and changes in affect. So there's a whole line of research looking at correlating those two, that if somebody actually has problems with aggression or changes in mood or significant affect disorders, that you look for the change of smell too. And together that can indicate that an injury actually occurred there. So I don't know if that answered your question, Tony. So, all right. Okay. So on to RF. Oops. Here's the clicker, Tony, if you want it.
So I'm here to talk a little bit about what my role has been in this. What are we doing with this case to make sure that something like continued instances of shoplifting don't happen again in the future? How are we addressing this? How are we taking care of this? I'm going to talk a little bit about resource facilitation. That is the department I work for. Dr. Trexler kind of put a little bit of an intro into resource facilitation earlier today. But in brief, the best way to describe it is we help people gain access to the services and the resources that they need to be successful. That also can include education as well. I could talk about it a lot more. I know that Wendy can certainly give you a very good advertisement as to what our program does, but at the most basic sense, that is what resource facilitation does. And so I got involved with Jennifer's case. We, as Dr. Trexler lined out earlier, are involved in this grant where we're kind of getting out there, we're screening. So we're already out there in the courts, we're screening for brain injury. Wendy is doing presentations at a lot of different agencies and facilities around the city. So our name is kind of getting out there. And we actually just had someone kind of come up to us and said, look, we have this client, we think she has a brain injury, this is what's going on, what can we do, how do we help her? And so, we got her very quickly referred to vocational rehabilitation services and got her referred over to PACE. And there's Jason over there, he did her intake. And so we got services kind of rolling in that way. So once the referral came to us from Vocational Rehabilitation Services, we, already having done the intake, were able to get her in for the testing, which Dr. Backhouse already went over. Since I missed her intake, I also just called the client directly and I set up an individual meeting with her to get to know her a little bit, do my own intake, and you know, when we had those test results, we met with the Voc Rehab Council and we were ready to roll. So what I have done to this point in working with Jennifer, we have worked to get her hooked up through vocational rehabilitation with an assistive technology evaluator. She was having a lot of problems on her job with keeping things organized. She had just an incredibly vast array of Post-it notes that was just here, there, and everywhere. And it was great that she was writing stuff down, but it just wasn't working for her whatsoever. You know, she was trying really hard, but just could not keep it together. So we got her hooked up with an assistive technology evaluator through vocational rehabilitation, so they were able to intervene with some technical solutions to this. Certainly also got her hooked up with an employment specialist through vocational rehabilitation, somebody who specialized in brain injury, who was able to kind of intervene on the job to make sure that things go well. Since at the time that we received her referral, she was really struggling on the job. You know, part of my role in getting this to happen through vocational rehabilitation was to just make sure that I'm on the ball following up with these two different providers to make sure that we're moving quickly. One thing about vocational rehabilitation services is, you know, because of the way that the system operates, sometimes it is difficult to push things through in a hurry. So that's where it was helpful to be able to, you know, did you receive your referral? Have you called her yet? Have you, you know, she's struggling on this. Are you able to meet her next week? To get those people in there and doing that in a little bit more of a rapid manner. One of the things that Dr. Backhouse mentioned when we were discussing Jennifer earlier is that she, at the time, was estranged from her two children. One of the things that I was able to do was to set up a meeting with Jennifer and her entire family and her best friend, and we went over, again, the testing results, and just, we had a good 2-hour talk about, you know, what does this brain injury look like? How does it present itself? What can you as family members do to help? What's it like for you as family members to experience working with this? Which I thought was very, very beneficial, and certainly, at least with one of her children, Jennifer is in a pretty close relationship again. The other big things that we're doing, as I mentioned, I'm trying to get connected with the resources and services she needs to be successful, is getting her, we got referrals to both a brain injury specialized psychiatrist and physical medicine and rehabilitation. We'll talk a little bit more about how the insurance played out on that, because that is a little bit more of a little bit more of a challenge, and that's something that we're still working on. But that has been the bulk of the work in the last couple of weeks. At first, she was on the job. She was on kind of a probationary period where insurance was going to kick in after a certain amount of time, so we were just waiting. We were waiting on insurance to kick in before we could act on those referrals. Ultimately, she did lose her initial job that she had when she was working with us, or when she first came to us. That's changed since then, so we've got some positive results. So after that, I helped her apply for HIP. That somehow fell through. She didn't have any income, but somehow they said that her income was too high. So most recently, I have gotten her set up with an insurance navigator. We think now that this is actually going to be the route to go, and she's going to be able to see then these providers that she needs to. Right now, we're also continuing to work on this legal issue that she has. I have met on numerous times with her attorney to talk about brain injury and the role that it's played, just to provide him with brain injury education. I know that Dr. Trexler is meeting with her attorney as well, and is actively involved in the case. Peter Bespikos over there has met with Jennifer, her attorney, and the deputy prosecutor, just kind of helping to plan the best course of action for successful rehabilitation for this person, because we don't want it to happen again. Okay, so as far as, where we stand now and where I think this program is helping her, to this point, unfortunately, no, we have not been able to get her into the doctors that we need to because of this insurance thing. But at the time that I'm talking right now, she's probably actually already met with the insurance navigator and is probably covered again, so that is something that we're able to act on. We did get those referrals. So I think that that's something that is moving forward quite quickly, and this is therapy that she has not ever had access to before and will have access to now. She is working again, and that's another big thing that is something that we're all quite proud of. She's working full-time, and she's working in a job that she's working for a survey company. I should silence that. She's working for a surveyor company, and it's a very structured job. So the problems that she was having before with organization and memory, she is able to kind of work around now because her job doesn't rely on those things. So it's a much, much better fit. And she's doing incredibly well. And especially now when you look over at her social life, she's now in a very serious relationship that has, to this point, worked out better than any that she's had in her past. She's become deeply involved with the local church. She has been able to now, she had been living for a long time in her ex's house that he was just renting to her, but, that was probably not the best of ideas. We were able to get her now. She's moved into a condo in a good part of town. She's interacting very well with her kids. She's very involved in church. And she's now looking at volunteer opportunities and working with offenders because this is something that has impacted her so much. So, your slide? Okay.
I think basically to summarize, unfortunately, like for Jen, traumatic brain injury has been a silent condition for her. It went undetected for a number of years that perhaps many of the issues that she had cognitively, psychiatrically, neurobehaviorally had actually been secondary or due to, at least in part, the brain injury itself. And when it goes undetected, these individuals are at a loss for care and for proper treatment, and they end up getting into a lot of trouble interpersonally with the law. So one of the things that we really want to do here is reach out more and educate individuals who come into contact with these types of clients and help them better understand what does a brain injury look like and how might it be affecting them, and if they are having issues from a criminal standpoint, drugs, alcohol use, theft, any of that, right, in psychiatric standpoint, that perhaps it might be wise in certain cases to actually do some screening for brain injury, at least to rule it out. And I think that if we can get better educated as a society and use better screening instruments, that we're going to have better results. That just like in Jen's case, we're going to be able to come in and implement the appropriate treatments and provide the services that that person needs and actually reduce recidivism and employment to communities so that people live good, functional, happy, productive lives. So thank you very much.